Viewed alongside Universal's classics of the early 30s, 1941's The Wolfman might seem like the underdog. A hugely enjoyable film, but not a masterpiece on the scale of Frankenstein. But when it comes to the franchise, The Wolfman has the last laugh. The only one of the classic monsters to have a consistent character arc. The only one who doesn't get swallowed up into someone else's story. And the only one to be always played by the same actor, Lon Chaney Jr., in a role he seemed destined to play. The Wolfman is the jewel in the crown of Universal's second era of horror. Unlike Son of Frankenstein, which began that era, it is not a sequel, but what we would now call a reboot, introducing audiences to Chaney's Larry Talbot, the tragic hero bitten by a werewolf, now doomed to become one.
Even a man who is pure in heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright.
The mythology it introduced had an old-world authenticity, but was mostly made up by screenwriter Kurt Siodmak, who would work on 3 of the 4 films, defining the themes of the series.
Only death can bring me release.
The makeup was by the legendary Jack Pierce. It took 4 hours to apply and a further hour to remove, but there's no questioning the result. But while it's the werewolf that grabs the headlines, the story's heart lies elsewhere.
Welcome home, Larry.
Prodigal son Larry returns home to the father from whom he has been estranged for 18 years.
The whole business is probably my fault.
The cause of the rift doesn't really matter, but the awkward relationship between father and son and the desire to mend it becomes a key driver of events.
See, the tradition also insists that the Talbots be the stiff-necked, undemonstrative type, and frequently this has been carried to very unhappy extremes.
Sir John Talbot was played by Claude Rains, his first Universal horror since his starring turn in The Invisible Man.
There's a way back, you fool. There must be a way back.
And the casting is a cut above most Universal horrors. Warren William was star of the popular Lone Wolf series and had played Caesar for Cecil B. DeMille.
Very good. But I'm too busy.
Ralph Bellamy was an Oscar-nominated supporting actor, memorably losing the girl to Cary Grant in The Awful Truth and His Girl Friday. And the cast also boasted horror royalty.
I will not disappoint you, my lady.
Casting Bela Lugosi as a gypsy fortune teller, also named Bela, directly linked the reboot to Universal's golden age. Behind the camera too was the studio's A-team. Indeed, Alfred Hitchcock was so impressed by the film that he selected photographic effects specialist John P. Fulton, cameraman Joseph Valentine, and art director Robert Boyle for his Universal debut, Saboteur. The Wolfman is also the genre debut of Evelyn Ankers, who would become Universal Horror's biggest female star. She was often cast opposite Chaney, though the two did not get along, following an argument over a dressing room.
What big eyes you have, Grandma.
Ankers' Gwen Conliffe is a by-the-numbers love interest in all respects but one.
But it's only fair to tell you I'm engaged. I'm going to be married very soon.
Love triangles were one thing, but the hero actively poaching another man's fiancée was a first for Universal horror, and reinforces Larry Talbot as a different type of leading man.
In fact, I really shouldn't be here.
Oh, but you are here.
The leads in previous Universal horrors had been either slim, bland love interests, or obsessive and increasingly unhinged scientists. Larry is a blue-collar hero.
I'm all right with tools.
Who abandoned his aristocratic family to train as an engineer in the States, where he also picked up an accent.
So old Paul turned out to be a cop, huh? Cop? Yeah, a cop. Policeman, you know.
The film, incidentally, is set in Wales. Chaney had built hot water heaters before turning to acting, and the character is tailored to him.
Look out, you'll get in your hair.
It's difficult to imagine Dracula's David Manners tackling a wolf with his bare hands. But Chaney refused a stunt double, and when the dog playing the wolf bit hard enough to break bones, the actor adopted it, and Moose would become his constant companion. It's a very Larry Talbot thing to do, bullish yet sweet.
I want to know what she was doing while my little Jenny was being murdered. I'll tell you what she was doing.
All right, tell me.
Of course, Larry is also the monster. But he is bitten while trying to save someone else.
Stay here.
And has no control over his actions as the wolf. And nobody played fate's tragic victim with quite the same hangdog pathos as Lon Chaney Jr. Still, Larry does kill people, and keeping him sympathetic is a balancing act of which director George Wagner was well aware. Larry's fight with a performing bear was filmed but cut from the final movie because it made him less sympathetic. The bear doesn't want to fight, sensing Larry's true nature, but that same nature makes Larry aggressive. To quote Kurt Siodmak's script, the helpless beast finally stops defending himself, and a last walloping blow topples him over. Larry rushes in to hit him again. In reality, according to Evelyn Ankers, the bear escaped its trainer and briefly terrorised the set. The scene demonstrates how Siodmak tried to show Larry's animal side without him changing. The screenwriter's original intention was to keep the audience guessing about whether the wolf was real or just in Larry's head.
I believe that a man lost in the mazes of his mind may imagine that he's anything.
And the werewolf would only be glimpsed as a reflection, specified as seen through Larry's eyes as he imagines himself. We can get an idea of how this would have worked from the transformation of Bela the Gypsy. The wolf is kept off camera. The editing suggests its presence. But neither Universal nor Wagner wanted a monster film without a monster, so changes were made, though hints of Siodmak's psychological wolf remain.
It's probably an ancient explanation of the dual personality in each of us.
And the writer would return to the idea 10 years later, again with Chaney, in Bride of the Gorilla. It's interesting to note that what Siodmak planned is what Val Lewton and Jacques Tourneur achieved with 1945's Cat People, which RKO had wanted to be closer to the Wolfman.
What is the matter, Alice?
There's no doubt that Siodmak's idea could have worked, but cinema would have lost something special. There is a habit of giving Chaney credit for the tragic Larry Talbot and Jack Pierce for the werewolf. But there's more to this than crouching and walking on tiptoe. Chaney was a big man, and there is an almost ponderous weight in his movement, but not as the werewolf. It's a ferociously physical performance, giving the monster a real presence. In fact, it's the sort of thing audiences had always expected from Chaney's father. Known as the Man of 1,000 Faces due to his facility with makeup, Lon Chaney Sr. was one of the biggest stars of the silent era, and his death at the age of 47 robbed the screen of an icon. Initially, Junior had done everything he could to avoid the comparison, acting under his real name, Creighton Chaney, and refusing horror roles. But studios wanted Lon Chaney Jr., and forced the actor's hand. In his own words, they starved me into it. The Wolfman was the first film to drop the junior altogether, forcing the actor to meet his father's legacy head-on. Chaney said, "I suppose the fact that I'm here proves that some people just can't escape their destiny." It's a sentiment that links actor and character.
Oh, I'm sick of the whole thing. I'm going to get out of here.
Whoever is bitten by a werewolf and lives becomes a werewolf himself.
Larry is a victim of fate, surrounded by portents, the mark of the pentagram. the target at a shooting range. A wolf's head cane he buys from Gwen.
No, that's a wolf.
A wolf?
Mm-hmm.
Even the romance itself is doomed. Although Siodmak's psychological approach was rejected, the shadows of it remain. The werewolf is background. This is Larry's story, fearing for his own sanity.
Bela the gypsy was killed last night. They found your stick by the body.
Suspected of a crime he cannot remember, but of which he does seem to be guilty. Tellingly, it is his father who defends him.
My son is ill. The best place for him is in his own home, proving his innocence.
But Sir John will not tolerate this talk of werewolves, and relations strain again.
They're out hunting for me.
Stop it! Stop it!
Leading to the most underappreciated exchange in the movie.
Dad,
What is it?
take the cane with you.
At that moment, Larry takes control of his own fate. In doing so, he saves Gwen, but consciously dooms himself. Despite their different ideas, the Wagner-Siodmak combination works surprisingly well.
It isn't enough.
Wagner's muscular direction stops Siodmak intellectualizing the horror.
The scientific name for it is lycanthropia. It's a variety of schizophrenia.
That's all Greek to me.
Well, it is Greek.
While Siodmak's focus on Larry makes this more than a rampaging monster movie. It has its flaws. Larry's meet-cute with Gwen is one of cinema's creepiest as he peeps through her window.
Well, from now on, I'll be sure to draw the curtains.
Why does Bela transform into an actual wolf while Larry is Wolfman? When Larry first transforms, he's wearing a vest and light trousers, but did the werewolf stop to change? There's a lot that doesn't add up, not least Chaney and Rains as father and son.
There you are, sir. I think that has it.
And it's no surprise to learn that originally Larry Gill was just a visiting engineer. It was George Wagner who made them father and son, and while that change makes the casting problematic, it also makes the film. The final fight scene gave Chaney a black eye when Rains accidentally clobbered him, and it's one of Universal's best. But it's also their most tragic. The film ends as it began, with father and son, one dead, the other devastated. The father-son dynamic is the Wolfman's silver bullet, taking an entertaining story and giving it emotional heft. And it's tempting to wonder if this last-minute change made the story extremely personal to Chaney. As Larry Talbot returns to his ancestral seat, so Chaney had come to Universal, where his father remained a legend. But while Larry has the chance to reconcile with Sir John,
There should be no more such reserve.
Lon Chaney Jr. was not so lucky.
Well, there's something very tragic about that man.
In 1914, after his divorce from his first wife, Chaney Sr. wanted her out of their young son's life completely. He told the 8-year-old Creighton that his mother had died. Accounts differ, but it's most likely that Creighton did not learn the truth until after his father's death, more than 15 years later, leaving him with questions that could never be answered and issues that would never be resolved with the father whom he worshipped. A year later, Creighton Chaney made an uncredited appearance in The Galloping Ghost, the first step in his own screen career. After 10 years of grafting, the Wolfman took that career to new heights. And with his deeply personal take on Larry Talbot, Chaney had created a character that would stand the test of time.
The way you walked was thorny, through no fault of your own. But as the rain enters the soil, the river enters the sea. Your suffering is over. Now you will find peace for eternity.
But the road to the Wolfman was not a straight one. The film was first mooted in 1931 as a vehicle for Boris Karloff and went through multiple revisions by multiple writers before being shelved in favour of The Mummy. In 1935, the idea was resurrected as Werewolf of London, with a new script drawing on Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The makeup, again by Jack Pierce, is simpler than Chaney's because it's necessary for characters to recognise scientist Wilfred Glendon as the wolf.
Then it suddenly struck me. It was Wilfred Glendon.
Still a great makeup, and it's a similar situation with the transformation scene. Technically much simpler, personally I find this more effective. And these simplifications allow the werewolf more screen time than it gets in later films. The big difference between Glendon's werewolf and Talbot's is that Glendon retains an awareness of who he is. But, like Mr. Hyde, is a more animal version of the man. So the wolf shares Glendon's jealousy, but is also compelled to kill. This does make the character less sympathetic, but it's Glendon himself where the film really slips away.
And you are not to go riding either.
What?
I forbid it. You hear? I forbid it.
He's just not likeable, though mention should be made of his wife, played by Bride of Frankenstein's Valerie Hobson.
I shall ride tonight, tomorrow night, the next night. In fact, every night there's a moon. Come, Paul.
An unusually strong female lead for this type of film. Directed by Stuart Walker, Werewolf of London has a mythology all of its own.
This flower is an antidote for what? Werewolfery.
And some strong sequences. The howl is a blend of actor Henry Hull's voice with an actual timber wolf. Yet the film fails to ignite. It performed poorly, meaning that any future werewolf film would not be a sequel, but a completely new story, with a new star.
Thanks for the bullet. It was the only way.
Coincidentally, one line in Werewolf of London seems to foreshadow the future.
The one that eats mice and men.
In 1939, Lon Chaney finally made a career breakthrough as Lenny Smalls in Of Mice and Men.
We're gonna have a little place.
Oh, we're gonna have a little place.
We're gonna have a cow, a pig, and some chickens. And then down on a flat, we're gonna have a field of alfalfa.
For the rabbits. And I get to tend the rabbits.
Tend the rabbits.
The critical praise set the studio planning another Steinbeck adaptation with Chaney, but poor box office doomed the project. We can only guess how the actor's career might have been different. Instead, he headed to Universal for his horror debut in George Wagner's Man-Made Monster. The film's success won him a new contract and gave the studio confidence to star him in a more high-profile film. The Wolfman was a major hit, and over the next few years, Chaney would also play the Frankenstein monster, Dracula, and the Mummy, the only actor to play all four monsters for Universal. The film's success also guaranteed that audiences had not seen the last of Larry Talbot. Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman reportedly started as a sarcastic quip made by Kurt Siodmak, who was then assigned to script his own joke. Initially, Chaney was to play both title roles, as he had already played the monster in The Ghost of Frankenstein. That idea was discarded, but Ghost of Frankenstein had ended with the monster getting a new brain, that of his friend Igor, brilliantly played by Bela Lugosi.
Igor will live forever!
So it made a kind of sense to cast Lugosi as the monster, while Chaney returned to his signature role.
Last night, I killed someone.
And although Frankenstein comes first in the title and Ilona Massey in the credits, this is Larry Talbot's story right from the start, when he is inadvertently returned to life by grave robbers.
It looks like he's asleep.
The full moon is actually not mentioned in The Wolfman, and Siobmak subtly changed his legend to include it now.
Even a man who's pure at heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the moon is full and bright.
This opening scene is the most unnerving of the movie. But without his father, Larry needed a new emotional hook for the sequel.
I only want to die. That's why I'm here.
Siobmak had hinted at self-destruction in the first film.
Take the cane with you.
Here, it comes to the fore, and the screenwriter juxtaposed the goals of the two monsters. One wants to die, the other to live forever.
The secret of life and death.
That was, in his words, the weenie around which his script was written.
How did you get that skull fracture?
Chaney was happy to return to a character which he referred to as his baby, but hated the makeup, particularly the transformations. In the first film, we only see a full face transformation right at the end, so this is the first time we see Larry become the wolf. And there are 3 transformations in the sequel, supervised by photographic effects genius John P. Fulton. The pillow is a plaster cast, so the creases do not move. Chaney's position was etched onto sheets of glass from 2 different angles, so he could get up and then resume the same position once the makeup had been changed. Chaney's horror stories about being nailed into position for 22 hours, unable even to go to the bathroom, are exaggerations, but it was an arduous process. Made worse by the fact that Chaney and Jack Pierce disliked each other.
Oh, now I want to die too. Won't you show me the way?
Accompanying Talbot is the gypsy Maliva, one of the most memorable characters of the first film, played by stage veteran Maria Uspenskaya, whose genuine belief in astrology aids her performance as the fatalistic gypsy. Moose got a cameo, and Patrick Knowles, who had played Gwen's fiancé in The Wolfman, also returns, though in a different role, as love interest to Ilona Massey's Elsa Frankenstein, going from hero...
I promise you, if you'll help me, I'll rid this area of this curse once and for all.
...to mad scientist.
I can't destroy Frankenstein's creation.
For most, the film was a positive experience. Even Chaney, whose drinking could make him a difficult co-star, had sobered up for his favourite role.
Dr. Frankenstein. Dead.
But for Bela Lugosi, it was a nightmare. Badly miscast, the 60-year-old actor struggled in the heavy makeup and costume, eventually collapsing from exhaustion. Stunt doubles Eddie Parker and Gil Perkins stepped in whenever Lugosi was too tired to continue. Even in his first appearance, when Larry discovers the monster frozen beneath the ruins of Frankenstein's castle. And worse was to come. As written and filmed, the monster was blind and could speak, tying with the end of The Ghost of Frankenstein.
Homer! I can't see!
But at the studio screening, the monster's dialogue met with laughter. Kurt Siobmak blamed Lugosi, but with lines like, "I will live to witness the fruits of my wisdom for all eternity," laughter seems inevitable. Whoever was to blame, Lugosi's dialogue was excised, and on occasion you can spot his muted mouth moving.
It isn't here.
Also gone were all references to the monster's blindness, making the actor's performance a comic parody. In a previous video, we called Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman the nadir of the Frankenstein series, and I stand by that. But in terms of the Wolfman series, it's a strong sequel, and Chaney rises to it.
Stop that! Stop it! Quit that singing, will you? Eternally! I don't want to live eternally!
While the much publicised fight is something of an anticlimax, and the missing conversation between the two monsters takes the edge off the one wants to live, the other to die conceit, Larry Talbot's quest for death remains a moving one.
I don't want to live through another spell.
Efficiently directed by Roy William Neill, the film was another hit, solidifying Chaney's star status at Universal. While Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman was filming, Universal was planning the obvious sequel.
I bid you welcome.
The Wolfman vs. Dracula would re-team Chaney and Lugosi, with the latter back in his own classic role. Son of Dracula's Ford Beebe would direct, and Bernard Schubert's script had the Wolfman fighting Dracula in the guise of a giant bat. But suddenly, Universal had new priorities. After 5 years away, horror giant Boris Karloff was returning to the studio, and Wolfman vs. Dracula was postponed in favour of his comeback films.
Dr. Honor, don't look at me like that!
First the climax, and then the Devil's Brood, which, under the title House of Frankenstein, would bring together Dracula, the Frankenstein monster, and, of course, the Wolfman. By now, Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman had put Universal off of casting Bela Lugosi, even in his greatest role. So John Carradine took his place as Dracula, while the unknown Glenn Strange played the monster. But there was no one else who could play the Wolfman. Incidentally, here Chaney's hands are not made up, probably because World War II had interrupted Jack Pierce's supply of yak hair and he couldn't afford to waste it. More or less held together by scientist Dr. Niemann, House of Frankenstein is an oddly episodic film, partly to accommodate Karloff's tight schedule. Dracula has already been and gone before Larry Talbot even enters the story.
The Wolfman.
Once again looking to end his cursed existence.
Why have you freed me from the ice that imprisoned the beast that lived within me?
And navigating more florid dialogue, this time by Edward T. Lowe, based on a story by Siodmak.
Even a man who is pure at heart and says his prayers by night.
Then you know.
The fact that love interest Ilonka is a gypsy has a nice symmetry, and she tries to help Larry by making a silver bullet, reusing an idea discarded from the original Wolfman script, in which Larry makes a bullet from the silver charm Maliva gave him. The Wolfman films went through a lot of scripts, but little was wasted. But Ilonka's efforts come to a tragic conclusion.
Killed by a silver bullet.
Fired by the hand of one who loves him enough to understand.
So the gypsies symbolically pay for their role in the curse. And this feels like a sad yet satisfying end to Larry's journey. But though the film was flawed, it made money, and Universal Monsters did not die so easily when the box office was good.
It is the place from which I've just returned.
Early rushes of John Carradine in House of Frankenstein were good enough that he was penciled in for the delayed Wolfman vs. Dracula. But now, censors got their first look at the script, including such lines as, "Lying in a pool of blood is the eminent Dr. Ziska, his jugular vein gouged and his throat bestially lacerated." The name Dr. Ziska was borrowed from silent horror The Monster, starring Lon Chaney Sr., but it wasn't that was grabbing the censors' attention. The script was shelved, only to be pulled out again a few months later when House of Frankenstein proved a hit, when it was heavily rewritten under the title Destiny, which incidentally was the working title of 3 Wolfman films, before acquiring its final title, House of Dracula. Again, all the monsters were back, but it's Chaney who gets top billing for the first and only time in the series, and he is the bona fide hero.
If you'll just give him my name. Talbot. Lawrence Talbot.
No explanation is offered for Larry's resurrection, even though the one in Wolfman vs. Dracula would have worked, but he is not happy to be back. Needless to say, this doesn't have the desired effect.
I only wanted to die.
But this time, there may be hope for Larry.
But you must do your part. You must want to live.
As Onslow Stevens' Dr. Edelman attempts to cure him. The film is a patchy affair, but with some good characters, like hunchback nurse Nina.
If we can produce the mold in quantity, think what it will mean to thousands of people all over the world.
Played by Jane Addams, who was delighted to be cast as more than a pretty face, and some great scenes. This one is discussed more fully in our video, Bela Lugosi, The Return of Dracula. The werewolf barely appears, though Chaney still gives 100% when it does. This is more about Larry, bringing him full circle.
This condition, coupled with your belief that the moon can bring about a change, accomplishes exactly that.
Put it another way,
see that this evil thing you've conjured up is only in your mind.
This time, the love story comes without a caveat.
Oh, I didn't hear you.
The doctor will see you now.
Again, there have been violent murders.
So naturally you suspect me.
But this time, he is innocent. This is the only film in which the Wolfman doesn't kill anyone. And this time, he gets the ending he deserves. Larry Talbot realising he is cured is perhaps Chaney's finest screen moment. And yet the most telling moment is still to come.
But if I am unable, you must do it for me.
When Dr. Edelman is infected by the blood of Dracula, he turns to Larry and... While the Wolfman doesn't kill anyone, this is the one time Larry does, because he understands what it is to live under a curse. Even as the Universal horrors declined in quality, writers and directors always found meaningful moments for the Wolfman, inspired by the tragedy of the character and the sincerity of Chaney's portrayal.
There's something tragic about him.
House of Dracula was the last of the classic franchise, and it feels almost as if it kept going for long enough to give Larry Talbot a happy ending. The following year, Universal released She-Wolf of London, inadvertently bracketing the classic franchise with Cheneyless films set in London, though here, the horror is only a red herring.
Where on earth did you get this werewolf idea?
It's a decent B-movie thriller with some horror atmosphere. In the mid-40s, public appetite for horror declined, and when Universal went through a merger, the new management ended the horror cycle, as had happened before in the mid-30s. This second era of Universal horror had been dominated by the Wolfman, and its end brought about major personnel changes. Lionel Atwill, a veteran of 3 Wolfman films, died shortly after the release of House of Dracula. John P. Fulton had already left the studio, while Jack Pierce was unceremoniously sacked. And amongst the stars dropped from Universal's roster was Lon Chaney. It was 3 lean years before Chaney returned to Universal for Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, with a less punishing makeup by Bud Westmore and Jack Kevin. The Wolfman gets a somewhat ignominious send-off. And Chaney would later say that Abbott and Costello made buffoons out of the monsters. One line may have been an in-joke, or perhaps unintentionally close to the bone.
Boy, what a bender he must have been on last night.
By now, everyone knew that the flask Chaney carried on set didn't contain the iced tea he claimed.
Look at yourself, you're a mess.
And important scenes were shot in the morning because by afternoon he would be too drunk to perform. Despite standouts like Jack Pierce and Evelyn Ankers, Chaney was well liked. Ilona Massey called him the sweetest man in the world, and on House of Frankenstein he would often cook lunch for his co-stars. But it could be a different story when he had been drinking, and from that Jekyll and Hyde nature to the issues with his father, it's easy to draw comparisons between the actor and the character he played.
He wanted life and strength. I wanted only death.
A month after finishing Abbott and Costello, Chaney took an overdose of sleeping pills. For 3 days, his life was in the balance, but he made a full recovery and would continue to work consistently and successfully for another 23 years. There have been various suggestions as to why Chaney did what he did, and we're certainly not going to wade into that, but there is a streak of melancholy that runs through the actor's life.
Well, there's something very tragic about that man.
There always seemed to be a shadow hanging over Lon Chaney Jr., a pentagram on his chest. It was something he channeled successfully into many characters, but never more movingly than as Larry Talbot. And posterity is the winner. The Wolfman films are an uneven bunch, but Chaney's performance gives them heart.
Dad.
What is it?
Take the cane with you.
Terror. And the possibility of redemption. Thanks for watching, and particular thanks to our Patreon supporters. As ever, a lot ends up being cut from these specials. Kurt Siodmak's original ending to The Wolfman was to be shot entirely from the point of view of Larry Talbot's corpse. So, if you'd like to hear us talk more about the making of these films, please do join us on Patreon. You'll also get exclusive reviews and other bonus content. What are your favourite non-Wolfman Lon Chaney Jr. films? Let us know in the comments below.